Hello, everyone. I am going to lecture on Chapter 12, which is public policy. So, what is the big deal about public policy and why does it matter? Well, public policy deals with the needs that we as citizens and residents of Texas have, and it's also is providing protection, and that's why the policies are put in place to give that other layer, if you will, of protection that we can't do for ourselves. I mean, it's just like the federal government, the state governments, their purpose of being there are to provide services to us or for us that we can't provide for ourselves. In the text, it talked about a little bit of the functions of the Texas Department of Family and Protective Services, which is or DFPS, which runs the Child Protective Services as CPS. Um, Normally, someone such as myself, when you're an educator and or if you're a counselor or in mental health or the things of that nature and certain, I would say, um, industries or positions that you have, you are a mandated reporter, meaning that are certain things that you see or if you suspect if there's some type of, um, let's say like in school, or school or university, higher education environment, if you suspect there's some type of abuse going on, it could be domestic abuse or excuse me, or it could be maybe in K through 12, and you're noticing that well maybe there's some child abuse going on, or it could be say for instance you're a supervisor and you're working in a place of business, and you're you know thinking or feeling that there's something going on, maybe the supervisor's being inappropriate to another employee. So there's just certain things. Even at, like a doctor, you go to the doctor and you're injured, and they of course ask you, oh well, what happened, and you make up a story that maybe is not. You could tell that it's just not truthful, and the injuries could not be sustained in the way that they're describing it, so that doctor would not be able to hold that in confidence and really should pick up the phone and make a report. So I kind of extended it beyond what um, with CPS, but excuse me, just mandating reporting, it is something that is important. And as it's indicated here in the chapter, it's saying that they are severely understaffed, and the issue with that is that cases can't get heard timely, and this really puts children in further danger. And since the pandemic, this has also been an issue too, not only of um, DFPS being understaffed, but now you have the pandemic, and then of course other workers were out. you know the way that they are going and say doing a well-being check, they're unable to do so because the shut in, from the pandemic and whatnot. And excuse me, it just made it where then of course some your medical appointments now went to being telehealth, where you're on the Zoom or whatever format or platform you're using in order to get some medical screening. And so what happens is, when you're in a virtual environment, you really can't really tell really what's going on because you're missing a lot. Um, you know, Nonverbal cues can be construed, and it's just a lot that has gone into it. Um, say for instance, there was someone, say for experiencing domestic violence, of course, in the home, and then there's children. Um, well, maybe that person doesn't have access to where they can, do virtual recording or meetings, which say if they were going to therapy or, and excuse me. So it's just a lot. It's just very complex, even as I'm discussing it right now. But it is a lot, and this is something that really um, needs to be rectified. Most social workers and mental health counselors, especially the social workers, they are terribly, terribly overworked, overwhelmed, and underpaid. That's another thing that happens. So, these public policies are important to make sure that um, we're all protected, from any type of dangers or what have you. So also too, there's some other things that were pointed out about public policy, and again, it is the duty and responsibility of the state. And public policies are really, again, those um, not so much laws, even though they do pull in that definition, but it's really just indicating that um, rules and guidelines that really should be followed. And it is these rules and guidelines are developed because there is some type of a public or societal issue going on. That's really where policies come about. As you indicate, well, as you see here, it indicates that the federal government can provide funds, to certain public policy areas, and I'll touch on a few of those public policies that the text talked about. That a lot of times, there is federal funding tied to it, but the state has the option to not want to participate. Also, to the balance of power between state governments and the federal government really has shifted over time, and that's one of the best um, examples of that is dealing with the No Child Left Behind. That is something that's a public policy and the way that things have shifted in terms of it was a mandate from the federal government, and there was all of this funding, federal funding that came about, and that was during the Bush administration. But once the Bush administration was, over, and the Obama administration came in, No Child Left Behind had been in force for some years, and it was on its way to come to a conclusion, to a closing. And of course, after a policy is in place, you can see what works, what doesn't. So usually, what happens when there's a change in administration, they go back and they review it, and they're like, okay, we see that this needs to be changed, this needs to be modified, and so really, No Child Left Behind period of time started to kind of, I guess, fade away a little bit, and then that's when the Every Child Succeeds Act came about, and it just really changed. Of course, all the states were glad that all the sanctions went away. If the students were not meeting the threshold for taking well, here it was a STAR exam and other state standardized tests in other states, but what happened is that federal funding was no longer funneled down to the states, and so it became their responsibility. So the question here is, so what is the difference between a law and a policy? And the answer to this question real easily is that a law is really, it actually is a statute that is put in place, and if you violate it, meaning you break it, you don't follow it, then you will either lose your freedom, and that may be, of course, of going to jail. You may have some stipulations of what you can and cannot do, which that's by way of probation or parole, and also you pay a fine. Sometimes you have all three, maybe two, or maybe just one, but that's what a law really impacts your freedom. Where a policy is just rules and a procedure basically is what you need to follow as well. But you don't lose your freedom. So, say for instance, if it's a policy of, well, Texas, you cannot put more than zero point zero 0.01 emissions into the air. If you do so, it's violating EPA policy number da 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 da. And then if you do, then of course you get reprimanded, and the most that can come out of it is a fine. And that's what we see when there's been like terrible oil spills and from the pipelines bursting under under in the ocean, and and it causes such a array of discord, because now you're harming not only the animals, the environment, those that live near it. I mean, it's just a lot of things that go into it. So usually those things are like civil matters when they get into court, because a lot of them do. There's been cases where, someone gets, um, uh, a corporation would be sued for wrongful death, meaning, okay, well, because your pipeline burst, it was near a home, it wasn't an immediate cleanup, all of these fumes emitted in the air. I was already with, bad lungs. Now I contacted cancer, and, I only have 6 months to live. I mean, it's usually cases that, have some of those elements in it. Now, how you can see the difference between a law and a policy is a law usually is specified as Penal Code Section 25.1, subsection A. And a policy will be No Child Left Behind Act of 2001. So anytime it's a policy, it is going to have the word act in it most of the time. Even at in the Texas legislature, they usually put the word act, in it. But you can kind of tell when it is a law and a policy, because the policy isn't going to say, okay, well, if this is not followed, you don't follow subsection A, then you're going to be incarcerated for 5 years. It won't have all of those things attached with it. So let's talk about the policy making process. And I was really trying to find a video that showed all of the phases, but unfortunately it is just nothing out there. um, so when a policy is going to be made, and this is on the state legislature level, for Texas. First, you identify what the problem is, and the problem could be, um, well, here, is an example of the problem of poverty. Okay, so how do you solve poverty? That is a societal issue. It's not just only here in Texas. It's just within society as a whole. So when it comes to the problem of poverty within Texas, well, what's really going on? Like, is it where, people are really below the federal poverty line? What does Texas need to do if we're this big, we're all about business here? What do we need to do, and what policy do we need to put in place to ensure that, um, we don't have a large percentage of Texans living in poverty? So this is how it all starts, identifying that problem, and then take it to your local, uh, political official. Here in Texas, they are the ones that have to bring about any type of policies or, you know, issues, so that it can be put up on the agenda. Hopefully, it is on the agenda with the legislature, and those are the individuals that um, take it into consideration and debate on it, and so forth. So now you identified the problem, it's on the agenda. Now you formulate it. So you try to think of what are some ways to make, in this example, poverty better. How can we get rid of it? You know, is it where it's a systemic issue? Is it where you know t- people just don't want to work? Is it that there aren't any jobs or available jobs? Is it where there needs to be more training? Um, so this is where you kind of do that brainstorming and come up with a policy that's actually going to work, that's going to solve this issue of poverty, which, just to add, that's a hard nut to crack. It really is. So then it's implemented. After the policy is, you identify what the problem is, you develop a policy to tackle that problem. Now you're going to implement it, meaning you're going to put it into action. And so once it's put into action, then you're going to, of course, every policy has some type of financial or economic part to it. Some don't, not all, but most do. Um, because you have to, of course, you have to make sure there's enough money in the budget to handle however you're gonna, whatever strategies you're using to deal with it. I mean, if you're wanting to develop job training programs, that's a dollar amount or money associated with it. You have to think about, okay, who it will be doing the training. Are we gonna just open this up and do it, say like the Chamber of Commerce are doing, and they have an agent's contract and hire somebody in to teach it, or are we going to go to local community colleges because they're more cost effective, and let them do it in um, say in their extended educational division. I mean, there's just a lot of ways you could think about it. So that's how, the implementation, you're actually putting the policy that was developed into action. And then after it's been in force for sometime, you do after 2 or 3 years, or, maybe you want to do a year, and you do an evaluation. You go back and you look and say, hey, what's working good here? Is this policy good? Is it bad? Well, where is it bad at, or where is it not working at? And so now whatever is not working too good, we need to tweak it so that it can work better. So that's really how the process of developing a policy is done. I know it sounds like a lot. It is, but it takes a lot of thought process. But after a policy is developed, it's a good thing, because of course the goal is to solve a social problem. But sometimes some of these policies are bad, and it is very difficult to get a bad policy off the books, meaning making it where it is no longer in force. And why? Because you have all of these different individuals, the hands and minds in the pot, of making decisions. And you may have um, the Republicans saying, hey, we like this policy. And then you might have Democrats saying, oh no, this is not working. It's doing more harm than good. So, and then you have to come up with another policy that's better than this one that you develop. Or hopefully that one will be, put to the sunset. Okay, so I just provided some pictures that you might have seen within your text for this chapter, that just kind of gives the different stages in the policy making process. Like here, it's like the picture on the top left is where, okay, you can tell it's K through 12. There are funding issues that need to be met within the educational system. And you see here on the right, getting information and doing this talking about what's going on and trying to develop how we're going to formulate this and get all of this together. Then the bottom left, you will see that, on a sign it says teachers and communities together, and it's funding education. So you see that there is support, public support for developing or creating or increasing the funding education. Why? Because K through 12, there are some schools that, the kids are still sharing books, or they may not be able to have any books, or the books that they do have, they're dated. I mean, it's just a lot of different issues that when it comes into public education. And then the last picture, the bottom right, you will see Wendy Davis with another individual, and they are talking about, this educational policy, and what's the best way to argue on the floor and debate it and all of those things. So all you see is a lot of different components into when you're trying to develop policy. Okay, so these are some other facts about the education policy, and we'll talk about the welfare policy as well as the healthcare policy as well for this chapter. Excuse me, in a little further in the lecture. So, as it's indicating, education is a big business here in Texas, but there are still several challenges that are being faced. Um, right now, Texas ranks as the 45th on public expenditures per enrolled student on the list, and I'm looking at the previous notes from 2019, and we were 44th. So we're not going up, we are going down, which is bad. Um, Also, to the population of students, what's happening is there's an increase in minority and disadvantage and students, and Texas has the highest dropout rates. So that, well, not the highest, but they have dropout rates that are really high, and that's not a good thing. What's happening is there is they call it desegregation, and it was where, well, basically what it is, of course, coming out of the Brown versus Board of Education, all schools were desegregated. But now what's happening is making a new name, and they're calling it D dash DE dash segregated, meaning that because of the increase in the minority population, and it's primarily in the Hispanic communities, what's happening is that their schools are in minority communities are being segregated, and it's not anything that's happening purposely. It's just because of the influx and the increase in the population, and it's just more so of one um, race. This is something also, it's not just only impacting Texas, but it is impacting California as well. And I would not be surprised if it's impacting Arizona, because if you think about it, more of the communities that they're really talking about, they're usually communities not very far from the border uh, between the state and Mexico. So, it is something that is happening as a shift, and it's just we need to adjust and do something different. I remember back in the 70s, it was where they began the busing, that's what they called it, where they would take a few minorities and they would bust them out to all white schools. It was a culture shock. I mean, I was one of those that went through that, because now you're taken out of your element. Maybe you they waited till you like in the fourth or fifth grade, and you're used to your friends or whatnot. Now, boom, you're in a new environment. No one looks like you, and there's no one really that you can really relate to, and so did it did not really work out that well. They did it for a couple years. It was kind of like an experiment, and then they stopped doing it. So now, moving forward, we've advanced to where, parents have the option to either by way of voucher or, depending on the school district that you reside in, you have the option to move your child out of a maybe low performing school and move them to a higher performing school. So you have options. So that's very beneficial. As it's noted here is that the largest school district in Texas is a Houston Independent School District. And just to make a note, this Gilmer um, Atkin laws that's happened in 1949. Basically, what that deals with is there's supplemental funding for education. This is through public monies, and this is so that teacher salaries can be raised, and they also determine what the length, meaning the days, how many days a school year is really going to be. Not so much as the time frame. I mean, everybody knows September or kind of August to end of May or June, but it's more so how many days physically that the kids stay in school. And then also too is to provide more state supervision of public education. So that is now um, the State Board of Education. That's what it used to be called, but now it is now called Texas Education Agency, and TEA, and basically they are the agency that develops policies for public education here within the state of Texas. They also deal with the budget, what the regulations should be when it comes to school accreditation, purchasing textbooks, and investing in a permanent school fund, as well as like licensing. If a teacher has to have a certain was credential, all of that came about, as everyone knows, since the No Child Left Behind. So they're the agency that deals with all those things. Okay, just to give just a little bit more information, um, the if you see here the budget for public education in 2018 and 19, because our legislature here is only meets every other year, so when they do the budget for Texas, it's always for 2 years. And so at that time it was 40.3, a little over $40 billion. So now I was looking for what that was the for this last, well, the year that we are now, 2020, 21. And the only thing that I was able to find is that there is $6.5 billion that was set aside for school funding and teacher pay. So that's a good thing. At least some of that is um, increasing in a sense. Now you notice there's 1,200 school districts. That's a lot. And there's almost 8,100 schools. Now I'm pretty sure that number is probably increased because if you notice there's more schools that are being built. It may not be that a school district is actually being developed, but the more that we expand and we are, you know, building communities rather than houses, there's going to be more school districts that pop up. It's just that's gonna happen. So let's move on, and I think that's gonna almost finish the education policy. And this last slide on education policy, I just want to talk about the charter schools. The charter schools have really made the public education a little different. And this has been after the, post No Child Left Behind era, about you can choose whatever school you want your kid to go to. Um, and that's a good thing. But here's what the public does not know about charter schools. Now, charter schools can kind of pave their own way, meaning they can make their own rules a little bit. They really don't have to have um, credentialed teachers. Now, they prefer them, but they can get around it because I believe this was about a year ago. It was the when there was an increase in teachers' pay. It was noted that, well, because there's a shortage of teachers, that you did not have to have a credential. So that opened the door for a lot of, say, individuals that were, say, um, maybe they taught in college but didn't have a credential, for like teaching in English or math or something like that. But if they had the experience, and of course they have way more, education that's required, they would in fact allow them to come in and work as teachers. Is this a good thing? I don't know. It just really depends. Um, Also, too, what happens is charter schools, this is how they get paid. It's always even in public school, it's a thing like, oh, you got to do attendance, you got to do attendance, shouldn't have to be in at this time. Why? Because that's how schools get paid. That's how any public school gets paid, and that's definitely how charter schools get paid. And when I say get paid, meaning getting money from the government, federal government. Now, where the tricky part comes in with the charter schools is that the charter schools, they get paid per head, per child. And say for instance, the federal government normally gives, or the state government gives the school $100, per child that comes to school every day. Okay, so you know that after that child has been out, or too many out, on a particular day or something, you're going to lose money if you can't justify, oh, that person was sick or all of that. So charter schools, what they do is that, of course, they take their role. Say, for instance, they have, they have whatever amount of students they have, but they bill the school districts $120 a day per student. So that's $20 more that they're getting per student. So you you know if you think about doing the math for a minute, where's the school district going to get this extra $20? Where's it coming from? And so that's why a lot of times you see charter schools, they do a lot of heavy recruiting, you know, a lot of um, school drives and things of how can I say it? Like, to make them stand out above the rest, meaning, and when I say the rest, meaning among public schools, like, oh, we have an agriculture program, or we have the best dance program, or we have a great band, or, they'll try to incorporate a lot of programs that, well, in my days, I'm going to tell my age, those were things that just, when you were going to school, public school, it was just there. In elementary school, you learn how to play an instrument, you were in a band, you could be in a little drill team, you could be in debate teams. It was just endless. We had exercise every single day. And so a lot of those programs got snatched out of public schools, and then that's when things started to change. There was no teaching to the test. It was you learned a certain curriculum. These are the things that you needed to learn, and therefore you would learn them in that particular grade. So it's changed. It's made it where, and again, charter schools are private organizations. Some are ran by churches, and some are just ran by public. Well, I'm sorry, not public, but private organizations. So when you take something that's ran public, which is about giving a service or providing a service to the public, and then you turn it around, and now it's becoming private, that means it's all about the bottom dollar. Okay, so now moving on to the welfare policy, dealing with poverty. Poverty, as noted here, is that was in 2016. It's like 5 years ago. With 15.6% of Texans live below the poverty line. That's really, really, you know, that's not good. Um, and now it did go down because in 2014 it was at 17.2%. So that's a good thing. Um, Now here it shows that in 2018 the federal poverty guideline, because they have a guideline based on they do the math and all of that, they have some formula, and they come up with what amount yearly is considered your if you live below this, if you're not making this amount of money, then you're living in poverty. And so in 2018 that number was $12,140, and that was just for one person. And then you just add on, the 4320 a year for each person and that you have in that living in that family. Um, the thing is that poverty is very depressive and oppressive. And basically, what it is that a family can't survive. They barely have enough money to pay for their rent, um, and buy food, pay for health care, and transportation. They may can't afford a car, as well as having clothes on their back as well as their family. So it is really a big deal, when you're talking about individuals living in poverty. And the pandemic has unfortunately brought about poverty to many of us, and when you were accustomed to working and making a certain amount of money and you knew you could take care of your obligations, and all of a sudden that's snatched away, or it doesn't exist anymore, or now it's being reduced. Now you're waiting, you're like, okay, now you have to go through to the process of, say, of course, you utilize your savings, but you only have so much savings. And then once that's depleted, then you have to, say, okay, maybe I can apply for unemployment benefits. And um, everyone knows it was just a problem, and it's still a continued problem with the unemployment, which has happened during the pandemic with all this the fraud and the scamming. I mean, they had big operations in jails, and they were like just using all different types of people's um, numbers. And I mean, when I say numbers, I mean social security number and information, and applying for benefits. And then the individuals have no idea they're working or maybe retired, and they get a letter in the mail saying, hey, here's your debit card for your unemployment benefits. And they're like, wait a minute, I never applied. uh, or they get a big whopping bill. Oh, we found out you didn't. There was some type of fraud, and you owe $22,000. It's just a big mess, and I think it's going to take a couple years or so um, to work that out. So this new American Recovery bill that was just signed by the president, this is something that is slated to cut poverty in half, which is a good thing. And it's targeted up of that. And then you think about it, and it's really geared about around giving everyone the $1,400 in addition to your dependents, regardless of how old they are. So that does equate to a much larger, or it can equate to a much larger amount that a person would receive. And that's a good thing, because now it's like, okay, I can breathe. Now I can pay my rent, or now I can catch up on some of my rent. Oh, I don't have to worry about eviction. Oh, I don't have to worry about my house being in foreclosure. Oh, maybe I can pay my car note or catch it. Oh, I can buy food, and I don't have to worry if I spend $80 that, oh my God, I'm not going to have enough to make it. So this is a good thing as far as what has happened so quickly. And from what I'm hearing, I'm reading the various articles and things, is that maybe by this weekend, some of us will have, a the refund or the credit, whichever way you want to say it, the payment in your bank account. If you already did your taxes for this year, well, 2020 or 2019, and of course by way of so you can get the direct deposit. Now, I want to talk about the New Deal era, and this was during the 30s, and I provided a picture, um, which I believe is in the text as well, and it just talks, lets you see what was going on, and these were farmers, that were in a line getting support from the government, and we have seen these lines in this pandemic as well. I mean, people, again, not ever imagining that they wouldn't be able to have enough food, for their family. So it is a time of it is a destitute time, but it's also a way of coming together as one, and unifying. So during this time that it happened, when FDR, I'm sorry, when Franklin Roosevelt was in he was a president. He was like, hey, I have to stimulate the economy. It is something that I have to do when this Great Depression, what is it that can be done? So that's actually when the Social Security Act came about in 1935, and again, the word act, there's a policy. And it really transformed into what we have now is TANF, which is Temporary Assistance for Needy Families. And it was changed from AFDC to the TANF during the Clinton administration when they was, you know, trying to do the reform for welfare. And really, the reason why the Social Security Act came about, it was, during, of course, the Great Depression, and it was during war, and there were a lot of widows where their husband unfortunately did not come back from the war. So he wanted to do something to give the widows, and it was really a widow's pension, to help them along, because they were, of course, by themselves with the children. And so over time, it has expanded to where you have Social Security disability. So if you have any type of disability and it's going to last more than 1 year or until you you die, I hate to use that, but that's really how they stipulate it. Then you can, apply for Social Security disability and, get a check. Sometimes they go by how many quarters you have contributed to a Social Security, and sometimes they don't. They also have expanded it to SSI, which is supplemental um, security income, and this program actually passed in the 70s, and it gives financial assistance to if you're elderly or disabled, um, and then also for like if someone is blind or partially blind or legally blind, something of that nature. But the difference with the SSI is that they go by how much money you're getting in your household. So if you are, married and you are applying for, say, SSI, and say your husband or your wife is working, then I think it's now maybe the limit is like eight or nine, no, maybe 12 or $1,300 a month or something like that. It might be a little lower. That's all that your household can make before you can get SSI. So they do make it very, very, stringent in order to qualify for it. And then also everyone knows about Social Security. It used to be it used to be 65, now it's 67, or you can apply at 62, but you're going to get a reduced amount. It's just a whole bunch of changes. And some of the reason of that being is because um, I think up until the 70s or the 80s, if you worked for the government, you did not pay into Social Security. So when you think about it, that's not so good. So there's a gap of where some years back there was not a lot of individuals paying. It just depending on who you work for. So then they ran into the problem like, oh my goodness, a lot of people are retiring. So then they're pulling, they're applying for their Social Security benefits, and oh wow, we don't have enough money to cover. So, that's why they say that when the Social Security that's coming out of our check now, that's really not for us. We're paying. It used to be. It used to say when the Social Security is coming out of your check, it is really money going toward when you retire. That's no longer true. Now the money that comes out of your check for Social Security, it is really paying for who's getting it now. So that just lets you know that we're behind. There's talk that they feel it's going to go bankrupt, or we're going to run out of money, um, which of course everybody's hoping we don't. So I think at some point in time they're going to end up increasing the amount of the Social Security that comes out of our check. That's the only way that we can try to recoup the fund. That's the only way, because we you know, meaning those that are working, contribute to that fund. Okay, so Medicaid and healthcare policy, and once we finish this policy, then we'll be done with this chapter. So, health insurance. Oh my goodness, it is a major policy problem in Texas. Texas has the highest rate of uninsured individuals. So I provided the one of the charts from this chapter, and it just shows you it's a large amount of children, but it is a majority adults, and also it's broke down by race as well, and it's sad. Um, I did look up and found some information about Medicaid as far as how much has been appropriated in the budget for it. And right now it's at $66.5 billion. So it did increase about $5 billion from our last, budget. So that's a good thing. And basically, Medicaid, it provides health care to individuals, or as you see, they use a word here, poor, but it's extremely costly for the state. And Texas is a kind of state, they have this individualistic ideology, meaning that, you know, every every man for himself. So when it comes to social programs, they really, I'll use the word that the previous textbook used, they are stingy, and they really don't like to provide. When it comes to Medicaid, I don't know if you guys have been watching the news, but there was just a ruling with Planned Parenthood where they Medicaid were no longer funded in Texas. So it's really interesting. As Medicaid, most people that are on TANF, they have Medicaid, and of course they have CHIP, through that's the part for their children, the health insurance. So just imagine, you've been going to your doctor, and now your insurance is no longer accepted. Um, but I mean, I know there's also, I mean, it's just like with CVS. CVS is having issues too with accepting Blue Cross Blue Shield. So just imagine, I mean, that's just on medication, but just imagine your health care. And you normally you can go to the doctor, you take yourself, of course you take your kids, and now you've been told, hey, we don't take Medicaid anymore. So that's going to make it even more so stringent upon the healthcare providers and the hospitals, and also how they're going to get paid. You know, there are some doctors and some hospitals that will turn your way, but mostly they won't. They usually will see you and try to put you on some type of payment plan or something. But just think about that. You know, I mean that's really a lot to process. You know, and then the Affordable Care Act of 2010. That is also something that you've seen through the years being fought, particularly a lot of that fight coming from Texas. You know, we saw some of it in the Trump administration. It's just as far as just saying, you know, no, it's not, it's unconstitutional. You shouldn't be able to do it. And let me tell you about Texas, though, when it comes to Affordable Care Act, which is Obamacare. You can go on and you can sign up all day long, but guess what? When you sign up and you go through the questionnaire and everything, um, they will tell you, oh, yeah, you qualify, you can get health care, but your monthly payment is $600 a month. So who can afford $600 a month? And the reason why it's so costly is because Texas opt out. And what I mean by that is they do not want to provide the other part of Obamacare where it's if someone cannot afford it, there's another part to it, and you would be able, it will be based off of your income, how much you would, you know, it'd have a much, much lower amount that you pay per month. And it's supplemented by federal funding that the federal government would give Texas. But Texas said, no, we don't want to participate. So it makes it aware, again, that thought process and tradition of everybody's on their own. If you can't afford the insurance, oh well, that's the philosophy of Texas. So it's really, really bad. And it makes it where it just, again, it puts a undue strain on the healthcare system that really could be loosened. It doesn't have to be like that. And then when you have more people that are insured. Okay, so here is a video that just talks about that Planned Parenthood, and this has been going on a while.
In less than a month, hundreds of women in the valley will lose access to their health care provider. Planned Parenthood locations in Texas, including two here in the valley, will no longer accept Medicaid. Here's Channel 5's Thumbi Verma.
Have about 4,000 patients in the valley, and roughly about 300 of those are patients who use Medicaid insurance.
Mara Posada is the Director of Public Affairs for Planned Parenthood. Back in November, a federal appeals court ruled that the state could remove Planned Parenthood from the Medicaid program, saying that the state has the right to determine qualified health care providers. The state had raised concerns about Planned Parenthood abortions, among others. And even though neither valley location in Brownsville or Harlingen perform abortions, Posada says they do provide other critical health services.
For women exams, pap tests, testing and treatment for STIs, testing and treatment for urinary tract infections, things like that.
Planned Parenthood subsidizes costs for people who are low income. Posada says that's one reason many people in the Valley go to Planned Parenthood. Her concern now is about the consequences of patients having to switch to another provider.
Patients called us and they were scared. They didn't know where to go. They were concerned because they have been, coming to us for years now. They are postponing maybe getting the birth control, which can have an unintended pregnancy as a result. They could postpone perhaps getting screened for an STI.
Those who have Medicaid have until February 3rd to use their insurance at Planned Parenthood. If you have any questions, you can call the Brownsville or Harlingen locations at 956-423-8584. Tanvi Verma, Channel 5 News.
Okay, so that's the background on that. But this is a fight that's been going on since for 5 years, coming from Governor Abbott. He has always wanted to stop the Medicaid funding for Planned Parenthood, and it's basically because of the one thing that some of the locations provide, which are abortion. But as the director indicated, they provide so many other healthcare services, and also, even if you don't have Medicaid, they will see you on a sliding scale and you just pay a portion, so it's really all about wellness. And it's just so sad that this is a service that is, you know, going away now in terms of dealing with the Medicaid. So they did fight a good fight, but unfortunately, they lost. Um, but we'll see what happens, in the future if maybe something changes. I don't know, but this is where everything is now here in Texas. So this concludes Chapter 12 on public policy. Take care.